The way someone knows what goes on inside a church is actually by a church bell. We tend to think of church bells as things that just call people to when Mass starts. And they actually have like first call, second call, third call, you're already late call. They have special bell ring for, at the point of consecration. So that's what a church bell does. A church bell tells people what goes on inside a church. And it's neat. There's a whole way of actually ringing the bell for the Angelus, which is if you just hear 3 tones, 3 rings, you do a vertical response. And there's a pause. And then there's another 3. And there's a pause. Another 3, pause. And then it's a peal. And while the peal goes on is when the prayer at the end is said. And so if you're on the fields and you start hearing these 3 rings, I'm doing the Angelus. And you do the Angelus. And then during the peal, you would do the prayer. There's a famous painting. I'm trying to think of actually who the artist is. If Rachel was here, she would be able to tell me. Called the Angelus. And if you pay attention, it's 2 farmers in a field, and there's like a church tower off in the back. And that's what it's kind of doing. The only reason why I bring this up is because this is a lost art, knowing how to interpret the language of bells. In Europe, all the bells still do this, because they're all been like programmed, and they just do it, and no one thinks about it. And people grow up in the shadow of the bell tower. People aren't even Catholic anymore. They haven't been to church in years. The bells still ring. They count the hours of the day, not necessarily canonical hours of when things are being said in the church, but it still does the Angelus. I was walking across Europe with a couple from Switzerland. They were atheists. They didn't have an ounce of religion in them. But I hanged out with them for about 15 days. They wouldn't leave me alone. They just kept following me around. It was really kind of interesting, like that they wanted to hang out with I was a deacon at the time. They wanted to hang out with the Catholic deacon the whole time. I didn't pull any punches. I mean, anyway, the bell started, we were at this one village, and the bell started making noise. It started doing the Angelus. And I listened to it. I'm doing it in my head, because we were like around a table drinking Coke Zero, and I didn't want to be weird and like stand up while they're sitting down and like just start ignoring them. And then I started doing the peal, and then the lady goes, "Someone needs to fix these things." Like, it's 12 o'clock. It's supposed to be 12 rings, and then like it went haywire, and it just started doing a peal, and like she goes like in Bern. The whole city does that, and like it's like so distracting, annoying, and I look at her and I was like, "You don't know what it's doing, do you?" And she goes, "No." And so I told her about the Angelus, and I was like, "You proved to me a theory that I've been having. Now I need a bigger data set than one person that is in Switzerland, but my theory is that people have inherited a heck of a lot of stuff from the past, and they don't know how to use it anymore." It continues to function in some ways. When I was in Spain, though, every like motorized bell tower was out of tune, so it sounded really bad. But it ends up meaning something completely different to the people. For her, it meant misprogrammed. For me, it meant incarnation. Those are 2 completely different references, okay? This is going to be pertinent when we get to probably talking about God and the images, the first commandment. Anyway, that's a little anecdotal story of one of the times I was in Europe, dealing with a European who lived in a culture, but it didn't symbolize what it was supposed to anymore. Hopefully we can heal some of that. As a conclusion to lesson 16, which was talking about the 3 theological virtues that have God as its direct object, okay? Belief in Him, love of Him, and hope in being with Him. I think I could just summarize it that way. I wanted to cover the sins against the theological virtues. Now, faith, hope, and charity. That's the order that we put these things in. Faith, hope, and charity. The sins against faith. For some reason, sins against faith. There's 3 principal sins against faith: apostasy, heresy, and indifferentism. Apostasy is the complete rejection of faith in Christ for something else or for nothing, but a complete rejection, a turning away. A heresy is a corruption of a teaching. And indifferentism is actually the one that we suffer with the most today. Most people actually, the majority of people in America are Christian, but man, there are all kinds of different types of Christians. And every time I talk to them, it's like they believe, in a certain sense, in something completely opposite of what I believe in sometimes. A political Christ, or, you know, a liberating Christ from a political thing, or a non-judgmental Christ. I don't know how someone calls Christ non-judgmental when he basically told everybody they were like gnashing of teeth and hellfire. I mean, he said that a lot more than anything else, pretty much. Or he says John was great, and John calls people a brood of vipers. So that's all making judgments. So I don't know what I mean the non-judgmental Christ is. But everybody likes that one. But indifferentism is this view of, do you want to know why? Everybody likes the non-judgmental Christ. This is like random social commentary now. The reason why everybody likes non-judgmental Christ, because the one chief, it's not even a virtue, it's a fake virtue. The one fake virtue that everybody puts forward in order for themselves to appear good is to not judge anybody. And I'll tell you something. The weakest thing you can do is not have any judgment or determination on anything. To not say right and wrong is not heroic. That's the easiest thing you can do. I won't tell anybody that there's such a thing as right and wrong. Look how good I am. I'm being non-judgmental. You're being unprincipled. You have no character. You believe in nothing. So they put forward a God that matches their own sensibilities of not judging people. Not all people do that, but we grow up in this culture because we live in a culture of tolerance, which is necessary because there's so many different creeds. But indifferentism is the view that all religions are really the same because they all reference ultimately the same God. And so that's good for you, that's not good for me. Let's just leave it at that. Well, what's good for me is the truth, and the truth is the same for everybody ultimately. So if the truth is good, it's good for everybody. That's actually how we have to think about it. Like, religion isn't an option, but religion seeks to teach the truth. And religion is the obligation to adhere to the truth. And it's all-encompassing. We believe in the Catholic faith, which means universal. Faith, which means it's universally obligatory upon all. It's open to all, and all must assent to it. I said on Sunday at one of the masses, the evening mass, because my boss wasn't at that one, so I felt more bold. But I said, I would never trust a priest who said one didn't have to be Catholic. I would never trust a priest who said that. The priest who said that there was like other things are valid forms and all this, like that it's not an imperative to become Catholic, I wouldn't trust that priest. The reason why I wouldn't trust that priest is because I don't know what he's given up his life for. It would make you think he actually probably hasn't in some part. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if there's other problems going on, because the way I see it, the way that I can actually do what I do on a daily basis is only because I believe it's an absolute moral imperative. I mean, that's what makes me wake up and do all the things I don't like to do every single day. And I do a lot of things I don't like to do every single day. But I do it because I think it's necessary. You're not married? Well, I actually like that. I'm just going to say that right now. There was a time I thought I wouldn't like that. I actually do like that now. It's like, yeah, and you know what? I really wouldn't have time if I was married. There's no way I would have time for a kid, you know? 15-hour work days, dealing with like just people in emotional crisis all the time, like just dad. Why do I do it? Because it's necessary. I would shrug my duty like that if I didn't think it was necessary. And so when people want to talk about priests who shrug their duty, it's because they don't think it's necessary, probably. To give extreme unction to somebody, to give last rites to somebody, not necessary. That's why they don't do it. I think it's necessary. I think grace is necessary. Okay, so indifferentism is going to be something our culture is naturally going to try to inculcate into us because of tolerance. Tolerance is okay, but it's not okay for a greater good. Like, we have to tolerate disagreement, okay? But that doesn't mean we have to reject our principles. Like I said, I spent 15 days walking through Southern France with 2 atheists, and they enjoyed my company. And I never once pulled a punch. And they actually just appreciate somebody who just spoke with principle about what they believed in. Like, you probably think I'm going to go to hell. I was like, yeah, I do. But I like spending time with you right now. I did tell them that. They're like, they're trying to figure that one out because they were expecting the guy in a collar to say something completely different, like give him a hug or something. I was like, I don't know. Yeah, that's what it is. Oh, okay, refreshing. At least you're telling me what you think. Yep. Okay, let's not talk about that one anymore. You know what I think. Done. Okay. So, indifferentism is really, really, really important to be sensitive to. Presumption, despair. These are the sins, chief sins against the theological virtue of hope. Now, all virtues actually stand in between 2 different extremes. And this is going to be the 2 extremes of hope. Is one, to presume that one is going to attain what they're supposed to be hoping for. And the other, despair, means one cannot obtain what someone is hoping for. So presumption, in a certain sense, treats the object of hope as if it's already a fait accompli. What are you hoping for if you already have it? I know I'm saved, so you don't have the virtue of hope, right? That's a good one. That makes people scratch their head a little bit. Think about it, because Paul talks about hope all the time. I was like, what are you hoping for if you know you're saved? It changes a little bit. So presumption is where one thinks they are guaranteed to already possess, in a certain sense, that which they in fact don't, okay? Because until you leave this world, you're not in the next. Which is why the virtue of hope, the theological virtue of hope, which is presence, unity of God in heaven, is something that you have up until you take your last breath. You work under the theological virtue of hope until you reach your end. So you can't live as if you're already there, or with a sort of confidence like you're already there. And also, you can't live as if you can never get there, because until you die, in fact, you can have hope that you can. So it just takes a moment of grace. It takes a dreadful moment to either lose grace or to have grace. Think of it that way. When I say moment, I mean moment, an instant. And so while we are on earth, we work under the virtue of hope. A good way of thinking of hope is it's the virtue of the wayfarer, the virtue of the pilgrim, somebody who's going towards a destination, not yet there. Okay? To despair would be to say, I can't reach destination. That's not permitted by faith because we have supernatural help to get there. He died for us so that we could get there. So we can't say God won't help me get there. No, get up, have faith that God can help you, and get on with your journey. But we have to hope. We can't have presumption. We can't have despair. One other way presumption sort of shows up in the spiritual life is when somebody sins and they automatically presume that they're going to be forgiven of it. In a Catholic sense, in Catholic sense, how this tends to manifest itself is, okay, well, I just sinned, and 5 days from now, it's going to be Sunday. I'll go to confession then. Okay, I'll be able to get my sin forgiven then. So I'm going to live the next 5 days, however the heck I want, because I know I'm going to be able to have it forgiven on Sunday. You're supposed to be hoping that you can have it forgiven on Sunday, because you could die that night. Okay, that's like how the sin of presumption will actually be functioning. I presume I will be able to be in a state of grace at this day, time, in the future. Like, you hope you can, and you're supposed to be living, trying to get to what you hope, not just presume that you already have it now, in a certain sense. Sins against charity. Now, these are actually the worst sins a human being can commit. Sins directly against charity are going to be hatred of God, and then subsequently of neighbor. One of the ways that we have hatred of God, and this a lot of people don't actually would think, is actually going to be sloth, or also called acedia. The worst case of, we tend to think of sloth as laziness, but in reality, sloth is sorrow at a spiritual good. That's a technical definition of it. Going to church makes me sad. That means you think church is a bad thing. That means you think worshiping of God is a bad thing. Makes me so sad, I would rather stay in bed. That means you think staying in bed is better than worshiping your Creator. Okay, that's not good. That's what sloth is. It doesn't necessarily have to be laziness. You might not be staying in bed. Going to church makes me sad because I would rather be doing gardening, because the daffodils really make me happy. Okay, that means doing gardening work is more pleasing to you. And it would make you sad to abandon that in order to go worship God, the creator of the daffodil. Okay, so sloth is that which makes us have sorrow at a superior spiritual good. Your book doesn't actually put it that way, but that's, I think, the best way of actually thinking about it. Scandal, true scandal, this is an important one. We use scandal in all the kind of wrong ways. Scandal is a Greek word. Does anybody know that? Does anybody know what it means? I've preached about this multiple times.
It means like to put a stumble.
Thank you. Do you know where, like a real famous place? Do you know where a real famous place is where scandalon is used in the New Testament? I mean, it's used multiple times in the New Testament. But it's used in a very famous spot, and it's really awesome. It's said right after Peter's called rock. Christ says, "You've become a scandalon to me," a stumbling stone, because he tries to tell Christ, "Don't go to Jerusalem." So he's been called rock, and then he's like, "You're making me stumble on you because you think like the kingdom of man, not of God." So that's an important thing for a Catholic to remember. Like the first pope, the rock on which the church is built was also something that Christ said was stubbing his toe from doing what he needed to do. A scandalon. So a scandal is something that would cause somebody to trip, something to fall. That's what a scandal is. It's something that, to live the faith is to walk on a path. Okay, a scandal is something that would cause one to fall on the path. So true scandal is when somebody does something and it would make others who don't know any better think that it is good what they're doing, when in fact it is a sin. So I could be a great scandal to people because I'm a moral authority, right? I wear a collar, people just trust me, and it's Father Savoy. He seems to take the faith really seriously, and so if I start doing something that's really bad, they would think it must be good. That's seriously scandalous. Now, a lot of people who are foreign to the faith would be like, they practice discretion and be like, okay, no, he's good 90% of the time. That was a crazy idea he had, and we should just forget about that one. He didn't have coffee or something. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. But what's really terrible is when you have somebody without discretion, a little kid. Millstone around the neck. It'd be better for somebody to have a millstone tied around their neck and throw it into the abyss. Who said that? The guy who doesn't judge anybody, right? If one scandalized one of these, what is he talking about? If somebody teaches sin to one of these, that's what he's talking about. If somebody scandalizes one of these, somebody teaches somebody one of these innocents, crime. In such a way that they think the crime is actually what they're supposed to do. That's horrible. That's appropriate punishment for somebody like that. Because what does a youth do? What does a little kid do? They actually kind of have to obey elders in a certain sense. How else are they going to learn anything? You think you guys figured everything out when you were 2 years old? You were trying to kill yourself when you're 2 years old. And everybody was trying to keep you from killing yourself. And good thing you listen to him, just like the commandment says. Your days will be long. Honor your parents, so your days that will be long. Because if you don't, you're going to walk off a cliff or stick a fork in an outlet and die quick. And so they're disposed to listen to people in authority. And so it's really important not to scandalize. True scandal. Now, what ends up happening, we use scandal in a certain sense of when somebody does something bad and it's exposed as bad and it's scandalous behavior. But true scandal that we're really worried about is behavior that is really bad that's put forward as good, which is why what's more scandalous, I'll tell you this, like what's really, like, for a priest to commit a crime and then be punished duly for it, okay, that's not nearly as scandalous than for a bishop who's just saying heresy who's never put in check because people think that what the bishop is saying is good. And they're wandering off the path. Whereas when a crime gets punished, everyone sees that was bad, that guy's getting punished. And everyone's giving thumbs up and high fives because they judged him correctly, okay? Whereas if a crime doesn't go punished, or if it's put forward under the auspice like it's okay, well then people are going to continue on their merry way thinking it's good. One of the ways that we scandalize is when we attend on a more practical level, like for you guys, is when we actually when our indifferentism, our latent indifferentism starts to affect the way that we think. And so like, if we go, since we want to be friendly and do false apologetics with like our Protestant buddies, and we like go to their church and then like we sing their songs and they go, hey, why don't you do the reading for us? And we go do the reading for us in their worship, and we start doing these things. That's scandalous because you're teaching them that, hey, me Catholic thinks it's okay what you guys are doing. But if that's the case, like, then why be Catholic? Because that's a heck of a lot. Like you can play guitar and do all kinds of cool things there. Does that make sense? Sort of? Yeah? You can witness a marriage in a Protestant church, but you can't be a lector in a Protestant service. Because the marriage is good and real and true. Because all it takes is like two people exchanging vows. Okay? But we can't do worship with a false church. Can't go to the synagogue and like pretend to be a Jew. That's scandalous. Paul didn't do that. That's why they chased him out of the synagogue and threw stones at him and beat him with sticks, right? Okay, we've got to be like Paul. Principled. Okay. So that's what true scandal means, is giving the appearance that you're okay with wrong so that people then think that it's okay. There's what we call Pharisaical scandal, which is false scandal. I encounter, at least I think I encounter a lot. I might not. I might be hypersensitive to it. That's where people say that you're doing things wrong that aren't really wrong, and they're trying to cause a big controversy over it, like the Pharisees do to Christ all the time. It's scandalous that he's eating with prostitutes and tax collectors. They're taking scandal at something that he's doing that's not in fact wrong, because is he telling them it's okay to be a prostitute? Like, no, he never said that when he had dinner with them. He said, don't sin. He went and taught people where they're at. He's being principled. He's exercising correct judgment on people. Whereas outside bystanders have bad intentions. One is like cry scandal when no scandal's going on. So be careful of scandal mongers. People like just wanting to always constantly expose wrongdoing, even when sometimes it's not even wrong. But they're trying to make things that are fine appear to be wrong. That's what we call Pharisaical scandal. It's a sin. Okay, first commandment. First commandment. Does this even tell you what it is? Thou shalt have no other God but me. I think he already told you how the commandments are divided, right? Did he already do that? Yeah, okay. The first commandment does not forbid us Why does it go like this? I'm kind of in the first commandment, I guess. Father Chris, did I do anything out of order? I just went to the very end of the first commandment. Yeah, okay, I'm good. I'm going doing images now. One last thing, sin against charity. There's one that's not in your book, and it should be there. They treat of it somewhere else, and that's schism. Schism is a sin against charity. A lot of people don't realize that. Schism is a sin against fraternal charity. Like, I do not associate anymore with my brother, okay? And so the sin of schism, which is when like somebody separates from the church, okay, because they're objecting with somebody in the church, authority. When they do a formal act of schism, it's actually a sin against charity. According to St. Thomas, sin against charity is worse than a sin against faith. Because without charity, you're nothing, right? Charity is the greatest virtue. Sins against are the worst virtue. So schism is actually a greater crime than heresy. A lot of people don't realize that. Father Savoy, priest of priestly fraternity of St. Peter said that. But I'm quoting St. Thomas. Okay. Other sins, I don't know, against the first commandment are going to be against, how does it put it? It's number 211. It deals with superstition and sacrilege. In a lot of ways, the virtue of religion actually governs a lot of this stuff correctly. Superstition, one that I would like to point out that's not actually in here, is superstition is an excess of the virtue of religion. Okay? It's either excessively attributing acts of religion to things that aren't God, okay? Or it could be misusing things that in an excessive way. Misuse of religious things in an excessive way could also be superstitious. So the reason why I bring that up is because sometimes you can find people that are quite innocent actually doing things that are superstitious because they think it's okay. Like if you got up in the morning, you're going like, okay, I will not have a good day unless, you know, I say 4 Hail Marys and then I turn around 4 times before I leave my front room, you know. And you do that like it's some kind of magical incantation. And you don't even like think of the Virgin Mary. Like you're behaving superstitiously. I don't care if you've cloaked it in your Ave Marias. You can do them in Latin too. It doesn't matter. It's still superstitious. You know, it's like just because you can misuse sacred things in a superfluous way. Okay, it's kind of like people with the St. Benedict medal. Like, I've never looked at this, what's on the St. Benedict medal. I don't have any regard. Who's St. Benedict? I don't care, but I put this magical coin underneath my dashboard. I'll be safe. You guys know what the St. Benedict medal is? Do you have it under your dashboard? Okay, like, you behave kind of superstitious. I'll get possessed unless I only drink holy water. Okay, like, what is this? Where are you getting this from? Father Savoy must be possessed because he doesn't drink holy water. That's what a truly superstitious person would think, right? Like, okay, so just because you have things that are in your normal experience are proper, doesn't mean you can't misuse them or use them in an improper way, even with kind of a quasi-religious intent. Because hey, it's a good thing not to want to be possessed, right? Right? So yes. Okay, good. That's important. Like I encounter that more, but that's only because I'm mainly around people who are like daily communicants and, you know, people who are fervent in the faith, and so they like will kind of experience the faith more with these kinds of things. So is it grave? No, it's not going to be grave, but is it like wrong? Like, yeah, you're like, yeah. Let's dial things back in. Tradition goes a long way with this, okay? Don't bury a statue of St. Joseph upside down in your yard in order to sell a house, okay? Like, I don't know where the heck that came from. And they sell even kits for that. Catholics sell your house kit. Like, And every time I read that, I think that's like absolutely sinful. Like, where the heck did St. Joseph say, bury me upside down if you want to sell your house? Like, why do you think that that's pleasing to St. Joseph to do that? Okay? A good antidote to guard you from superstition, which is misusing religious things, is actually tradition. Like, that's the whole point of tradition. Is like, what is the custom of the church with this thing? Well, I'm sorry, you're not going to find anywhere prior to 1980 where people are burying St. Joseph upside down. You're like, okay, so something weird happened in 1980. What happened? Some person, you know, in America decided to try to make some coin and start selling something this way. I don't know. You know, I don't know where it came from, but tradition, like, we do follow the custom. Priests, hey, the Spirit moved me. I think it would be great to do a second reading at this Mass. You know? Why stop with Mass of the Angels? Let me change the page and do like a second epistle from the Mass of the Holy Eucharist. That's a sin of excess in religion. Like, where the heck do I get that authority to do that? That's not the custom of the church in the liturgy. So priests can commit this sin too. More is better, right? Father, when you give me communion, I want you to stack 3 hosts on top of each other. It's really important. Because I need a lot of Christ today. Not only is that superstitious, it's also heresy, okay? You don't get more Christ by doing that. So, what is the limit? I'm going to let Father Curtis answer that one, because I know what my limit is, but what is the limit? Current legal limit is you can do 2, but I think that's always abused, because I think that ubitas caritas, yeah, I'm going somewhere else with it. Huh?
We got it later. It's 8:12 already.
I can't hear what you're
It's
saying.
8:12, we're going to keep moving, sorry.
Okay, I'm going. Sacrilege is going to be like a demeaning use of a sacred thing. Especially when you get something blessed, okay? If you get something blessed, that means you're setting it aside to do holy things with it, okay? So like if you bless a rosary, but then you use it like as a, you never say it, but you use it as something that, what was the thing we were saying? To lasso your TV remote with, to pull it over while you're watching, you know, your great TV show that you just binge watch for 5 hours, and while you complain that Mass takes too long, especially the sung Mass, because it's an hour and a half, 2 hours of Father Savoy preaches, and you're like, so if you're misusing something that you put aside for sacred use, okay, you bless a picture, but then you go like, you don't use it in a religious context at all, or you don't put it in a respectful place. I got this blessed picture, and then, you know, the brace underneath my bed broke, and so I need to put a board there. I'm going to put my blessed picture under there in order to support my rear end when I'm sleeping. That's disordered, okay? Like, blessing things is something special. You're setting it apart. A priest commits sacrilege when he sins against the 6th commandment because of what my vows are. It's like a completely different species of sin. I don't like just sin against another person. Like, I'm set apart, and I took vows to be apart. So if I break that, I commit a sin, a sacrilege, a misuse of a holy thing. It's set apart. Sin against the 1st commandment. It's bad. Okay? Yeah. Images is one that confuses a lot of people. I don't know why. I'm going to give you John Damascene. There was an early heresy called iconoclasm. It happened in the East. It never really happened in the West. West never really had an issue with this. It was something that took place in the East. And they started breaking all the images because God says you can't make any graven images. Even though if you read the Old Testament, like, they're constantly making stuff all the time. Like they have to make candlesticks, and they make palm trees and pomegranate things, and then they make the big cherubim like that are inside the Holy of Holies. They make all kinds of images. They're like, well, they didn't make any image of God. I was like, well, okay, you can't really make an image of God per se, okay, because God is kind of imageless. But John Damascene makes a good point, and it's, if you understand human cogitation, like how humans think, John Damascene says, he goes, look you can't think of anything without imagining it first. Think about that. Think of angels. You know, we already had that lesson, they're pure spirits. But you're probably thinking of some kind of human-like form with wings. That's because it's impossible for you, because of how you know, because you know things through your senses. So all your thought process has to work through sensation. So John Damascene was like, if you're destroying images because you think that it impedes the worship of God, well, then you need to also, like, he doesn't say it, but you might as well lobotomize everybody too, because you're doing it with your imagination if you're not doing it with a physical image. Okay, so images are physical signs that have reference to something else. If you want to know the true spirit of idolatry, that's worshiping something as if it is God, okay? Not using an image to think about God, okay? And the way that you worship something as if it is God is when you order your life towards that thing. Be that money, be that fame, be that sex, be that anything, name your thing, okay? Like idolatry is like the fundamental sin of the Old Testament, because it just means putting something and ordering your life as if that is your God. It doesn't mean looking at a picture of a saint and thinking of the God that gave the virtue to this person who taught the true faith about the God that you also believe in. Okay? Like, there's nothing more human than actually making images. We can't live without them. Think of your mom. Oh yeah, I see her right now. And that's exactly what the picture does in the room. I don't like, when I kiss the picture, I don't do this. But if I did, it's because I'd be trying to imagine kissing my mother, which I don't do. But anyway, we don't have that kind of relationship. But you get the point. It's not the picture. I'm not infatuated with the picture. It's the person behind the picture. There's nothing more human than actually needing images. Like, you have to have images. And anybody who says that they don't use images is just actually not being honest. Okay, so we propose and we put forward actually the use of physical images. Relics actually function the same way. They're remains. We call them remains. Think about that. Well, remains of what? Remains, something that is left behind, right? Like, well, who left that behind? In the Old Testament, like, take my bones with you when you leave Egypt. You know, that's what old Joseph said, you know. And they take Joseph's bones. Like, bones, I'm convinced in the Old Testament, because the way that the poetry works too, bones are like a natural symbol for the soul. Because that's like what persists long after that life is left, is you still got the bones. Those bones belong to a person. Like, no one thinks those bones are my mom, but they think of their mom when they're at the grave. Okay, so like, when we give honor to the saints, and we use relics, they're holy because the person was holy, okay? They refer to the person. And why was that person holy? Because he had a large share of the participation of the God, okay? So, one thing I think that really confuses non-Catholics is that in Catholics, we have veneration, we have hyper-veneration, like to the Virgin Mary, and we have adoration, which is only given to God. Like, our liturgy, we offer sacrifice, the supreme sacrifice of the altar, to God. We sing songs too, normally like psalms in the liturgy, but also to saints. Like, we have a huge expression that we do, okay, when we exercise the virtue of religion, and there's a gradation to it. We sing songs, popular songs to saints, and to the Virgin Mary we sing hymns. So we sing the most to her, because she's worshipped the most, because she's the highest share of goodness of God than all the saints, because she was full of grace. Everybody else just has a lot of grace, or some grace, or very little grace. And so we give honor according to how much of God they have in them, how much of grace they have into them. But we only give adoration to God. And I think a lot of people get confused on this because, like a Protestant, like, they just read and they sing. Like, they don't do the sacrifice of the altar. Like, so the distinction between adoration and veneration is lost on them. Because how they worship God is by singing songs and stuff, and that's it. They don't offer the Eucharist. And so when they see, like, Catholics singing songs, they're immediately thinking, like, you're worshiping God. Like, dude, when I worship God, I'm on 2 knees for 2 hours of Father Savoy saying the Mass, and he's preaching. You know, like, I'm praying for a long time, you know, and even when I pray to the Hail Mary, I use the divine name in the dead center of it, like, because, like, it's because of him that she's so heavily venerated. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. And, like, I even bow my head, like, because I adore God only, and I have veneration for all these other people outside of that. It's an important thing to remember. Like, we have a much higher expression of how we offer and what we offer to people. Yeah. Okay. Second commandment. Second and third commandments of God. Thou shalt not speak the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Okay. The first commandment has to deal with, like, knowledge, huh? Having the true God. Well, the second one has to be about actually representing it correctly. Okay. If we witness to the truth and we swear, this makes a distinction between swearing. I never knew there was. If we take an oath, if we witness to the truth and we invoke the name of God, like, that's not necessarily a sin. It could be if it's for, like, something frivolous. Like, why are you invoking solemnly the name of God for, you know, that you got the gas, you filled up the tank in the gas yesterday? Like, I swear to God, I filled up the tank. Like, okay, that's pretty monumentous. You're not like a murder trial. Do you swear to tell the truth? Like, nothing but the truth will help you, God? Yes, I solemnly swear. Like, okay, so, like, we don't willy-nilly, or we don't use the name of God in order to witness the truth in frivolous manners. Why? Because his name is holy. So we don't demean it by just misusing it for all kinds of things. So we can use it to witness the truth. You can never invoke them in any kind of way to witness something that's not true. Okay, that's a complete abuse of something holy. Okay, that's a type of sacrilege, an abuse of something holy, which is God's name. Okay, the name refers to God himself. It's a picture. Another thing, we can't use his name as a curse word, and that, like, it so frustrates me, because this is another thing that our culture passively gives us. Because, you know, like, blasphemy doesn't actually increase your parental guidance rating, according to Hollywood. Using the F-bomb does, though. And so if you use the F-bomb too much, you'll end up with an R rating. But if you want to keep it PG-13, replace all the F-bombs with GD. Let me tell you something. That's a much worse thing. But popularly then, everyone's just watching stuff and everyone's just using blasphemy all the time. They're using God's name. Exactly what the Hollywood producer's doing. I don't want the R rating, so I'm putting, in place of this curse word, I'm putting God's name. Think of what you just did. I'm using God's name as a 4-letter expletive. In order to, so it's not a valid sign by which you can manifest to others your displeasure at a situation. It's not a valid sign to you. Our language has lots of ways you can vocalize your displeasure. If you want to learn some of them, you can just listen to me talk for 30 minutes, and I'm sure I'll give you a couple ways I manifest my displeasure at something. But, so that's an abuse of God's holy name. That's something that people really need to be sensitive to, and you need to get sensitive to it. You do need to get sensitive to it, because it's not okay at all. And especially when it becomes instinctual. That's a scary thought. Without thinking, Father, I just say it. It's like, that means it's part of you. You've done it so often that you've programmed yourself that even when you don't think, you say it. You know? it's become a second nature to misuse the name of God. So it's dreadfully serious, actually, to not be okay with the fact that I just do it habitually without thinking. You better be working on not doing it. You need a new nature where it never comes out. Let me tell you something, like it never, I can't think of the last time I ever did that. Like seriously. Like I can't, it's, even when I was like in college, when I was a hell-raising rebel, I mean, I wasn't, that to me was always just like, I always like got mad at people, actually. I would get mad at people. I would call people four-letter expletives after they would say something like that. I'm just joking. This is a joke. This is a joke. My boss was like right there. I told him he didn't have to come tonight, and he was like, "Oh no, I want to be there." And I was like, "Can you sit in a place where I don't see you?" Bam. Am I out of time?
It's a good time for a break.
Okay. Take a break. I just want to finish.
Take 5 minutes. It's about 8:25.
What can you do in 5 minutes?
We'll come back here at 8:31.
Thanks. Okay, we still missing anyone? That's an impossible question, right? Did this turn off again? You can hear me? Oh, it's just so good. All right, what time is it? 8:30. Okay. All right, we'll get started again. So, now this is actually really great because I was actually planning on teaching the second half of this course, but the way that it worked out on the recording, it's going to sound like Father got fired. So I'm glad it worked out that way. Now, we don't usually break things up, but I want in the 5th commandment to talk about some things about bioethics and the like that I've talked about a lot in the context of catechism. So, but first we need to get there. So I want to just take you very quickly through the second, third, and fourth commandments. So in the second commandment, Father already talked about taking oaths and when it might be appropriate to do that. He talked about blasphemy and what really a great evil that is. We also want to talk about vows. Now, we've talked about vows a little bit already when it came to the context of religious life. You remember that religious generally take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. But it's possible actually to take other vows. So people might take a vow to fast for some time. It used to be very common in the Middle Ages for people to take a vow to go on pilgrimage or even take a vow to go on crusade. When it comes to vows, it actually makes the good work more pleasing to God. And the reason is because you are doing the good work, but you are also fulfilling a pledge to God. So there's a twofold goodness to what you're doing. And in addition to that, because you're binding yourself to it, you're making an oblation of your will. In other words, you're fixing your will and you're saying, I am not going to change this. I am ceding this part of my will to God. And that is very pleasing, but in a vow, you take something generally that's not a matter for sin, going on pilgrimage or not going on pilgrimage, and you make it potentially a matter for sin. And so you should never take a vow without a confessor or spiritual director, bouncing that off of him. And I'm not saying that because you're all lay people and you need to listen to the priests, and even I would do that. You know, if I really wanted to take a vow for something, I would go to my confessor, I would go to my spiritual director, and I would say, hey, I've been thinking about this. I really think it's something I want to do, but do you think that it's reasonable? Because we're not generally good judges in our own case. And we can put ourselves in a bind really quickly, literally in a bind, by multiplying a bunch of promises and vows. So you should never, never do that. If you want to do something for God, it's enough if you don't have access to a confessor or a spiritual director, just make a resolution. Lord, I'm resolved to do this. And just leave it at that, where you're not binding yourself in any way to the performance of the act. So, okay, so that I think is enough to wrap up the second commandment. The third commandment is to keep holy the Sabbath day. Now for the Jews, this went from Friday evening at sunset until Saturday evening at sunset. The apostles changed the Sabbath because it was still a time of public revelation. They had the power to do that. They changed the Sabbath from that particular window to Sunday. And really Sunday midnight to midnight. And the reason they did that is because all things were made new by Christ. And so you had suddenly an 8th day of creation, of recreation. You had a new terminus of time. And so they shifted, in honor of our Lord's resurrection, the keeping of the Sabbath to Sunday. Now, when it comes to keeping the Sabbath, we want, on the one hand, to avoid what we call excessive Sabbatarianism. That's where you enter into the Pharisaical idea of the Sabbath. You know, the Pharisees had just all of these multiplied laws about the Sabbath, and they became completely crippling to people. There was actually an expression at the time of our Lord, a Sabbath day walk. And it was not very far. It's like 900 yards or something. Is that right? I don't know. I think it was about 900 yards. So you were expected as a good Jew to kind of keep track of how many steps you took that day and to limit yourself. And you could only untie a knot if it could be done with one hand. And you couldn't take medication because that was to work. And then they had all of these kind of crazy ways to get around the laws that they had invented. And it became debilitating to the people. That is not what the Sabbath means. But on the other hand, we don't want to have total laxity when it comes to the observance of the Sabbath. We really do want to set this day aside and sanctify the day. And that means involved in divine worship. And that means not just getting ahead in the rat race. Because what happens to us when we work Monday to Saturday and then Sunday comes and we do servile work all day Sunday is that very slowly that starts to erode the whole purpose for living from us. And we start to just live for work and live for getting things done. And that's not why you were made. We have to work. It's part of our punishment, actually, from the fall. It's work and suffering. But that's not why we were made. We were made to be united to God. And if we do not section off Sunday and keep it set apart and really different in its character from the rest of the week, then we're going to lose our entire religious spirit. And you're going to have no hope of any kind of spiritual life. So on Sunday, we're generally obliged to go to Mass. Okay? If you're sick, you're not obliged to go to Mass. And that means what I would generally advise people is if you're sick enough that you would reasonably call in sick to work, don't go to Mass. You have no obligation to go to Mass. Or if you're contagious at all, or think that you might be contagious, don't go to Mass. That's against charity. Especially here, where we've got, 500 people in a church made for 250 people. You're going to get everybody sick if you come on Sunday. So stay home. And you're not sinning to do that. In fact, you're doing something virtuous by staying home. And then to the degree that you can, still try to sanctify that day. Make sure that you say some extra prayers. And that you still give that day a different character. In the old days, the faithful used to go to Matins very early in the morning. You remember I told you earlier, it took about 2 hours, right? And then they would go to Low Mass, and they would receive communion at Low Mass, because it wasn't given at High Mass, because too many people, it's too long. High Mass was just for the worship of God. That's it. It was like completely focused on God. Not that receiving communion is not part of that worship, right? But the expectation was that people would go to Low Mass, receive communion, and then they would come back again for High Mass. And then they would go home and they would have, a little brunch or something with their family and spend some time in recreation and just sharing time with family and friends. And then they would come back to church again for Vespers. the whole day revolved around divine worship. And I'm not saying that you need to do all of those things, but that really is the ideal in the mind of the church, that we should be reaching for that. Trying to get to the point where Sunday really has that sacred character all the way through. Now, we can violate the Sabbath rest gravely, and most moral theologians would say, depending on the severity of the work, somewhere between 2, 3, 4 hours. If we do servile labor for longer than that, that would be like mowing the lawn, working on your car, doing your spring cleaning, right? Doing any of these things that you're just trying to get out of the way from the rest of the week. That these things, this could constitute even grave sin. And if it's something like digging ditches, like really intensive labor, then even a couple hours of doing that would be sufficient for a grave sin. If it's something less intensive, then maybe 3 or 4 hours. Okay. Now, the liberal arts or liberal work, like painting a painting, painting a portrait or something like that, that is not a violation. Okay. Sports, some activity in sports, even though you're doing something that is exerting yourself physically, is not a violation of the Sabbath. But even there, with something like sports, we have to be careful, especially in our modern day. There's so many families that just run from one sporting event to the other. They run themselves ragged on Sundays because first Julie has her volleyball game, and then Johnny's got his soccer game, and it's just one thing after another, and at the end of the day, it's like, Have you committed grave sin? I don't know. But have you done something that was good and pleasing to God that day? Absolutely not. That's not a good way for your Sunday to look. So stuff like that should be by far the exception. And even when we talk about sports being okay on Sunday, you really want it to be something that is really like, this is what we're doing. It's just going to have fun, right? We're not doing this because we're on a schedule and, we have to be here at this time and there at this time and so on and so forth, okay? Anyway, a lot of things with the third commandment you might have to work out with your confessor, because we could talk about examples just completely to infinity, okay? And we don't have time to do that. So you might sometimes have to ask your confessor, hey, Father, is it okay to do this on a Sunday? You should really not be shopping on Sundays, because you're making other people work, right? And again, like the whole point of Sunday is to kind of get away from the materialism and all the things that drag us down to the earth, just that are necessary parts of life. Sunday is a departure from that so that we can reconsecrate our heart to God, so that when we're doing all that throughout the rest of the week, we can keep that fervor going, even in the midst of all the worldly things that we have to do as just a part of living. So you really shouldn't be shopping, again, unless it's necessary. If you need medicine for your child, you can go to the pharmacy on Sunday, okay? Servile labor, if it's necessary, you can do that on Sunday, right? We're not slaves to the Sabbath. A doctor can work on a Sunday. If the roof collapses of your neighbor next door, you can go over there and help him, get his stuff out of there, right? That's an act of charity. So, it's not just so clear-cut as to say never any kind of servile labor. Necessity can demand that you actually do some work on Sunday.
Is it possible to an exception where there's a business that would benefit, that have their bulk of their businesses on Sunday weekends? Just curious.
I would in general say no. I think if you have like someone that's selling clothes and they say, well, I have to sell clothes on Sunday or else I'm not going to stay in business, it's like, don't sell clothes, man. Go do something else then. St. John Vianney said, I've never known a more sure way for somebody to get poor than to work on Sunday or to steal. There's like an irony to it. Now, is it wrong to work, like let's say you're one of the employees, and they say you have to work on Sunday. I think you should say, I would prefer not to work on Sunday. Can you schedule me other days? If they are telling you, we're going to fire you, again, we're not slaves to the Sabbath. So generally my advice would be, try to find work you can do that doesn't involve working on Sunday. But in the meantime, this is what you have to do to support yourself and support your family. There's certain jobs that have to be done on Sunday. And again, if there's a necessity, it's fine. A doctor cannot just say, like, it's the Sabbath, I can't work today. Like, you're bleeding out right now, but you'll have to come back Monday. You can't do that, right? So doctors, nurses, there are police officers. Like, help, I'm getting robbed. Like, sorry, it's Sunday. You can't do that. Priests, right? Okay, so again, the third commandment, we don't want to have excessive laxity, but we don't want to have excessive rigidity either. There is a very happy medium. And if you set that time apart, you're going to find that it really is life-changing to just have a day that's consecrated like that. Because it affects all the rest of your week to do that. It lifts everything up with it. So, okay, fourth commandment. Fourth commandment obliges us to honor our parents in the first place, and then by extension, other figures of authority. So we do owe obedience in this life. Wives owe obedience to husbands. Parochial vicars owe obedience to their pastors, right? Priests owe obedience to their bishops. Citizens owe obedience to their secular government, right? Now, every time we owe obedience outside of the religious vow of obedience, we're talking about something that's demarcated by the common good. And so it is possible for an authority to overreach in obedience. So if I tell Father Savoy, I want you to take over the youth group and I want you to make sure that you talk to them about these things, those are things that are properly part of my province as pastor. And if he just said, well, forget you, I've got a better idea, that would actually be sinful. But if I came into Father Savoy's room and I said, I don't really like your bed on this side of the room and it should be on this side of the room, and here's a novel that I want you to read during your recreational hours, and and this is how you should structure your day with your personal time, and this is what you should be doing on your day off. That's beyond my scope. Like, he doesn't have to obey that. And I should not be insisting on it, okay? The secular government will often do things like this. They will overstep themselves. So now it calls for discernment, right? You can't just say, oh, automatically, like, this is beyond the scope of powers. But it does happen, and we need to be aware of that. Children owe obedience to their parents for a twofold reason. In the first place, they owe obedience to their parents because they owe to them a debt that can never be repaid. In fact, this is why the fourth commandment is the highest of all the commandments that have to do with neighbor. It leads all the others. Because you cannot give life back to your parents. Just about every other debt you can repay, at least in principle. You can never give life back to your parents. And so that's the foundation of a virtue that we call piety, which governs a relationship that is not equal. And not just life, but generally being raised by them. You can't repay that. But children owe obedience to their parents for another reason, which is because they're lacking in reason. And legally even, we recognize that. We recognize an age of majority, under which there are certain decisions a child cannot make without the parent's consent. Father mentioned it earlier. When you're 2 years old, you're running around, you think it's fun to put forks in outlets. You're basically trying to kill yourself all the time, and everyone around you is trying to keep you from killing yourself. This is an additional reason why children owe to their parents obedience. And that does shift a bit when a child hits majority, when a child actually becomes capable of making prudent decisions. It doesn't mean that the child doesn't owe anything anymore to the parents. So if you read the literature of the church, for example, an adult, even that wants to get married, should go to his parents and say, this is who I'm thinking of get married, and what we're thinking of doing, and what do you think of this? And should take seriously the advice that's given. That's owed to the parents. It's part of honoring parents. But again, it does shift when somebody gets to the age of majority. Okay, so additionally by this, children do have an obligation to take care of their parents in their old age. That is something that actually belongs to justice, not to charity. You're not just being charitable when you're taking care of your parents when they can't take care of themselves anymore. That's due to them in justice. And this happens a lot in families where you get one child that's taking care of the parents and all the other children have nothing to do with it. And it's really tragic. And they're going to have to answer for that. So plan on doing that as your parents are getting older, to provide for their needs. This commandment also governs patriotism. So we owe certain things to the nation that provided for the common good for us. And patriotism is kind of similar to piety, that it's a debt that can't be repaid. You guys were all able to come, many of you, to Mass tonight and come to a building that has lights on it tonight and to learn about God tonight because there's a common good that's in place that you didn't put there. And that can't be repaid. And that's why a country can actually ask her young men to lay down their life for the country. And that's not asking too much. In a certain sense, even the soldier that lays down his life is only giving back to the country what is the country's due. And that should obviously never, never be taken for granted. The sacrifices that people have made for us to make sure that our common good is still here. Don't ever tell a soldier, you're just doing what you have to do. No, we owe a lot to soldiers. Okay, I'm very conscious of the fact that we have a lot of servicemen here tonight even. But the country can do that. The country can have a draft and say, we're going to war to protect our liberty, and you must fight. And you don't have a right to just say, not doing that. Not worth it to me. That's not your decision.
I assume that what was the country was having unjust or unprovoked.
Well, yeah. I mean, if it was a manifestly unjust war, that would be a different thing. But very often there's things in play that we're not certain about. It's hard for us that don't have all the information to always be able to say this is an unjust war. Okay. Generally, I do want to encourage people to vote. I think we have a grave obligation to vote in a type of government like our own. And someone that is not voting just out of laziness certainly sins. Just not voting out of laziness. Okay? Now, there can be legitimate reasons not to vote. So I don't want to get too involved in politics, but in 2012, I did not vote, at least for, I think I wrote in somebody's name that had no chance of winning. But I was sick and tired of just getting these milksop, middle of the road, no principles, just read in the wind type of candidates from the Republican Party. And so I didn't vote in a way that was meaningful, but it was because that itself was saying, like, no, you cannot just take my vote for granted. You have to do something to earn my vote. So there was a reason for it. It wasn't just I didn't want to go to the polls, right? But in general, we do have an obligation to vote. And that obligation, you know, I don't think you need to vote for your mayor necessarily, okay? It's probably not sinful to not vote for your mayor. But when it comes to high office that has such a dramatic role in shaping our country, especially because subsidiarity is not really observed in our country, you have a really grave responsibility to vote, okay? Any questions about that? All right. We do have an obligation to pay just taxes. So I won't go into right now what all that means, just taxes. So, okay, so that brings us then to the fifth commandment, except I do want to talk very briefly about a principle called epikeia when it comes to obedience. Because there are times where we are right to disobey even a reasonable and just law. And that is because human laws can never take account of all the circumstances in play. And they shouldn't. They shouldn't try. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a 1 billion-page long law book, which is going to be unusable. So human laws cannot foresee all of the circumstances. So I'll give an example for this. Let's say you have a father of a family and he leaves the oldest daughter in charge of watching all the kids. He takes his wife out on a date. And he tells the oldest daughter before he leaves, bedtime is 9:30, everybody needs to be in bed at 9:30. And then he comes home at 10:30 and everybody's in bed, but the little one is wailing in bed, covered in vomit, like just completely, you know, blood everywhere. And the father comes into the room of the oldest daughter and says, "What's going on? Your little sister's vomiting everywhere." And then the oldest daughter says, "You said everybody in bed by 9:30. Right? I was just observing the law." Like, no, there are certain times where you don't have immediate access to the legislator and you can't clarify. But reasonably, you know the legislator would not want you to observe this law under these circumstances. I'll give you another example. Let's say, so priests are bound to recite the divine office every day under pain of mortal sin. So that means if I don't recite basically the entirety of the divine office in a day, I've committed mortal sin. And the church binds me to that. That's part of my responsibility to pray for all of you. So let's say I've had a long day, I've been hearing confessions, I've been, saying masses, I've been meeting with people, and I just haven't had a chance to get to my office until 10 or 11 p.m. And I'm saying my office, and then I get a phone call, and somebody's dying. Right? Now, should I go to the hospital right away? Or should I say, well, I'm going to commit a mortal sin. If I leave right now, I need to finish these prayers, and I'll be there as soon as I can. No, I should go right away. Because the legislator would want me to do that under those circumstances. And I am not committing sin to do that. All right? So there's a lot of examples of that. And that principle we call epikeia. Now, it can be a deadly principle because it's really, really easy to just epikeia, oh, I'm sure Dad would want us to finish this movie that's only going to go for another hour and a half after bedtime. Epikeia, no. We have to be on really solid ground whenever we invoke something like that. We have to be morally certain that this is what the legislator would want under these circumstances. Okay? Okay, so that's the fourth commandment. Now, the fifth commandment. Fifth commandment is thou shalt not kill. And in the first place, we need to discuss what that means, because it's not wrong to kill people necessarily. There are many circumstances under which one person is taking the life of another human being and may even be doing so virtuously. So, in a just war, for example, you could take the lives of enemy combatants and not sin by doing so, and in fact be doing something that's virtuous. If you're defending yourself, somebody comes at you with deadly force, you can defend yourself with proportionate force. And that's not just a legal principle, that's a moral principle. And even if you kill that person in the pursuit of your own defense, you've not done anything wrong. Or you're defending somebody else. Like, let's say somebody is attacking poor Mike Rund because he's this tiny guy that's easy to pick on. And I come to his defense. I haven't done anything wrong to do that. So what do we mean when we say thou shalt not kill? Well, the better translation is probably thou shalt not murder. And murder is the deliberate taking of innocent life. And there's two key words in there that are really important. Direct. The direct taking of innocent life. The direct taking of innocent life. So direct and innocent. Those are both very, very key. So somebody may not be innocent. They may be on the wrong side of what is a just war. Or they may have committed crimes that demand a just capital punishment. Or they may be in the process of attacking somebody. Right? So it is possible to directly take the life of someone who is guilty, not innocent, and it's not a violation of this commandment. Now, you can also take innocent life. You can even foresee the taking of innocent life. You can even intentionally take innocent life indirectly. So let's say, for example, that you're a Marine artillery captain and you've been given instruction to launch artillery into a city that has been taken by the Nazis. Like, let's just make it as clear as possible, right? The Nazis, you're in France, you're trying to liberate France, and you're being ordered to launch artillery at fortified positions of the Nazis in this town so that you can liberate the town and push the Nazis back. And you know, if you launch that artillery, that some of those rounds are going to fall on innocent people, and there's going to be the loss of innocent life. Can you do it? And the answer is yes, because even though you are foreseeably taking innocent life, you're not doing it directly. Okay, it's indirect. Because what you're doing is attacking an enemy position, and one of the unfortunate and unintended consequences of that is that some innocent people are going to die. Okay? So we can even sometimes foresee and take the life of an innocent person when it's not the direct intention. This happens very often as well in bioethics. So when we come to medical decisions. Let's say, for example, that you have a woman who is pregnant. Let's say she has 9 or 10 children that really depend upon her. And then after discovering her pregnancy, you discover she has cancer. This happens. This is like a real thing that happens to people. And she's told that if she immediately begins treatment, the prognosis is very, very good. But if she delays it until after childbirth, she's almost certain to die very quickly. Can she take chemotherapy? Chemotherapy is certainly going to kill the child in the womb. And the answer is yes. The answer is not that she must, but it may be the most prudent thing for her to do, given all of the circumstances there. Now, is she foreseeing the death of the child? Yes. Is she directly intending the death of the child? No. Like if there was any other way to do this, she would look for it. If they could somehow keep the child from being affected by the chemotherapy, she would do that. Right? But it's not the direct intention that she has. It's an indirect consequence of something that she's doing. And that brings us to a principle that's very, very important when it comes to the ethics of war, to bioethics, and to a lot of other areas of ethics and morality, which is called the principle of double effect. And the principle of double effect is what we use to figure out whether or not it is permissible or necessary or good to do something when there are foreseeable evil effects to that activity. And when we talk about the principle of double effect, in the first place we have to say that whatever the activity it is, objectively has to be good or neutral. So you can never invoke principle of a double effect in such a way that the ends just justify the means. Right? We can never do evil that good might come of it, in other words. That's not a valid use of the principle of double effect. So the activity has to at least be neutral or good. Cannot be in itself evil. You could never, for example, invoke double effect for adultery, or invoke double effect for theft, or invoke double effect for blasphemy. You just can't do that. All right, so it has to be at least good or neutral. Now, there's never a neutral act. All of our acts that are human acts, meaning they're motivated by reason, so it's not just like breathing or doing something mindlessly, but you're doing something with purpose, they always have a moral character to them that is at least defined by the intention in mind. So walking in principle is a neutral act. Like it doesn't have a moral character on its own. But as soon as in reality you start walking somewhere, you're walking for some purpose. Right now, I'm pacing to keep your interest and to help, hopefully the lecture to be better understood. So there's actually a good moral character to the walking that I'm doing right now. If one of you was leaving here and walking on the way to rob a bank, even the walking that you're doing has a morally evil character. Right? So when you're talking about double effect, the thing in principle at least has to be good or neutral. You can never do something that is objectively evil. There also has to be proportionality between the good and the evil effect. That's not proportionalism. Okay? Because we're talking about something that is, what you're doing is good or neutral. All right? You're not talking about, doing something that is evil, but it's only slightly evil and it's going to have really, really good effects. That's what we call proportionalism. You cannot do that. You could never murder one person, for example, even if you knew it was going to save 1 billion lives. You can't do that. You'd have to say, no, forget it. Because we're not proportionalists. But when we come to double effect, you do have to have proportion between the consequences of whatever act you're doing. So we already gave the example of the woman that's pregnant and she has chemotherapy. Is there proportion there? Yeah, we're talking about the life of the child and the life of the mother. Right? What if she just wanted to take some drugs for, because she was tired and knew she could take some drugs that would make her, feel more alert, but she knew it was going to kill the child. Now, is it wrong to take drugs that make you feel more alert? Maybe not, depends, right? But maybe it's fine, whatever she's thinking to take. But there's no proportionalism if she's pregnant between her feeling alert and her baby dying, right? Now, I'm giving like really extreme examples to make it clear and easy to follow. I don't suspect that would ever happen, that someone would actually do that. Okay, so there has to be proportion. Now, when we're talking about the consequences, you cannot have the good consequence be itself a consequence of the evil consequence. Right? Again, you cannot do evil or intend evil such that good might come from it. Okay? So there's all these kind of rules that we have in place when we talk about the principle of double effect, and then we use the principle of double effect to measure the moral weight of things, sometimes that are very, very complicated things. So, all right, and then sometimes you can have situations that look almost identical from the outside, and one of them is okay to do and the other one is not. So let's say, for example, that you have a plane flying and you know with moral certainty that it's going to hit a skyscraper. Like it's been hijacked in order to hit a skyscraper. Can you shoot that plane out of the sky? And if you don't have principle of double effect, you're going to have a lot of trouble answering that question. Now the answer is yes, you can do that. Because what are you directly doing? What is the object of the act? You're shooting down what's basically become a missile, a hijacked plane, from hitting a building. Now, one of the consequences of shooting down that plane is that you're going to save the lives of, 3,000 to 10,000 people in that building. The bad consequence is that a lot of innocent people are going to die. 200 or 300 innocent people are going to die. Right? There is proportionalism between it. Right? You're weighing many, many lives on both sides of it. You're not directly intending the deaths of the people. If there was any way possible to evacuate all those people off the plane before the missile hit, you would absolutely do it. Right? The good consequence is not coming from the evil consequence. There's separated lines. So yeah, you can do that. Now let's just change the circumstance slightly. Let's say now you have a guy and you know he's serious because he's done this in the past and he's always followed through, and he calls you up, you're a civil leader, and he says, hey look, I've got a whole building that's wired to blow. There's like 3,000 to 10,000 people in this building. And if you want me not to blow up this building, you need to kill the guy that's standing next to you right now. Now it's even less people, right? You're only having to tolerate the death of one person in order to save all those lives. But you can't do it because you're doing something that's objectively wrong just to bring about some good effect. And there's no separation of the lines of causality. Right? And this comes very much into play when it comes to pregnancies. This comes very much into play when it comes to a lot of different war ethics. It comes very much into play for many, many different issues. And you need to know at least that it exists and that there are sometimes answers to very complicated, tricky questions that might not be immediately apparent or obvious. So that's the principle of double effect. Okay, I do want to just close out. I know I've kept you a little long. I want to close out the fifth commandment so that we can kind of start with the sixth commandment very cleanly next time. So, abortion is most certainly and one of the gravest violations of the fifth commandment. And we have to be very, very careful these days. Even the numbers you see, as staggering as they are, 1 million babies per year in this country alone. Far more than that worldwide. Something like 55 million going back to Roe v. Wade. If you go back to that same date, 1972, and you look at the worldwide numbers, you're looking at estimated 2 billion surgical abortions since that time. This is one of the gravest evils of our time and indeed of all times. And it doesn't even begin to enter into all of the chemical abortions that we cannot even account for. So now they have the day after pill, Plan B they call it, which is a chemical abortion. We have now even the pill itself. So the last stage of the pill is actually abortifacient. Medical community actually redefined conception as not what would make sense, which is the meeting of the two the uniting of the two gametes, but instead implantation. And the whole reason for that redefinition of pregnancy begins at implantation was so that they could sell the pill as a contraceptive and not as abortifacient. And there's no way to account for all of that. Now they have, what is it, what's the one? It's a couple of letters and then some numbers. RU46, you know. This is a twofold pill, so one pill is given which brings about the death of the child, and then another pill basically brings on an early delivery. And we don't have any idea of the numbers of these sorts of things. So it's an absolutely staggering thing, and certainly to be most condemned. And now we're seeing things happen on the other side of life. So euthanasia is also very, very wrong. Suicide is very, very wrong. Now, very often with suicide these days, what we're discovering is that there's grave mental illness in play which reduces somebody's culpability, at least potentially. But objectively, it's very, very wrong. And people that decide to euthanize themselves because they don't think they're going to have quality of life, or are euthanized by others who have made the judgment that they're not going to have quality of life, this is very, very wrong. And it's certainly where our society is heading, where there's going to be people that make determinations about whether or not you're useful to society anymore. And if you're not, and it's already happening, not necessarily always legally, but it's already happening in a lot of elderly care homes or nursing homes, where people just die. You know, medication's missed or a window is left open and like, oops, they died. So that's not a condemnation of every elderly care home or nursing home, but these things are happening. And it's going to become more and more. Now we're even getting to the point in Belgium now it's legal for a parent to decide that a child is never going to have good quality of life and to euthanize his own child. And that law's been passed and it's been exercised. So there's parents in Belgium that have done this. They killed their like 6-year-old child because the child had a bad disease that was causing some suffering and they didn't want to deal with it. And they didn't want the child to have to deal with it. We don't have the right to do that. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean that we need to cling to life with everything that we've got until the last possible moment. So we do distinguish between what we call ordinary care and extraordinary care. And we are bound to seek for ourselves and for others, at a minimum, what we call ordinary care. Now, it's not the most clear-cut distinction, because by ordinary care, we just simply mean care that is not excessive or extraordinary in any way. And what we generally mean by that is food, water, basic antibiotics. But generally, somebody is not obliged to live with something forcing them to breathe. Somebody's not obliged to live through a procedure that's going to be intensely painful that they just don't want to go through. Someone's not obliged to go through a procedure which is going to bankrupt his family. All of those things we would call extraordinary care. So, and again, this is a place where it can be helpful as your own parents are getting older or you're getting older to talk to a priest and say, you know, I'm facing this illness, or my loved one is facing this illness, and like, you know, what's really necessary in terms of the care that needs to be given. So, food and water almost always have to be given, even if it's administered through a feeding tube. So, one priest put it really well. He said, usually ordinary care is the care that you would give to an infant. You know, can an infant feed himself? No. Right? Somebody else has to feed the infant. And we generally have to give that to everyone. It can happen that food and water become actually destructive. So, especially as somebody kind of gets towards the very end, their whole body can start breaking down where they can no longer absorb nutrients or even no longer absorb water. And if you give that person more and more water, you're just going to see the body blow out. At that point, that's no longer part of, you're not giving them any care by giving them that food and water. And What about painkillers? So, and again, we can come back to double effect for this. So, can you administer morphine to somebody when you know that that morphine is going to shorten the person's life? So you have somebody that's dying, they're in intense agony. The only thing that you can do to bring that agony down is to give them a bunch of morphine, but the morphine you know is going to, instead of living 5 days, they're going to live 3 days. Something like that. Can you do it? Yes. Okay? But you could not administer that morphine for the purpose of killing him. You know? So you couldn't give him a little bit more and just, let's just end it right now. Okay? You have to legitimately be trying to treat the pain and then anticipating as one of the unintended evil consequences of that act, the early death of the patient. Okay? So you could see where double effect, like, it's really, really important for a lot of things. Okay?